What is up, guys? Rick Cactus here, and today we're gonna be having some fun. We're gonna be satisfying some curiosities because we're taking every single exotic auto rifle in Destiny 2, giving them to a full 6-man fire team, and putting them up against the final boss of the Last Wish raid, Riven, and seeing two different things. Number one, can an exotic auto rifle one phase melt Riven within the cheese? Or number two, if not, which ones are the best? Which exotic auto rifles output the most damage in a boss damage scenario? And so, let's get started. Now the first thing we gotta do is introduce our contestants today. Starting us off all the way from the D2 reveal trailer, we have the Sweet Business. Now after that, from Warmind, we have the Suros Regime. Next up, the new boy from Forsaken, we have the Cerberus +1. And lastly, the only exotic energy auto rifle, we have the Hard Light. Now let's kick things off with the Sweet Business. Back in vanilla Destiny 2, this used to be a legitimate option for DPSing bosses. Its intrinsic exotic perk is Payday, larger magazine, increased accuracy when firing from the hip. It has another unique perk with Business Time. Holding down the trigger boosts this weapon's range and rate of fire and automatically loads ammo pickups into the magazine. So, if we're using, and what we're going to be using for all of these DPS phases, a Well of Radiance in combination with as much Riven's Bane gear that we can possibly put on to get a damage bonus, and a melting point from a Hammer Titan, but that Well of Radiance is going to have Lunafaction boots, which means it's going to automatically reload as we're shooting, and that means the Sweet Business is going to get to its highest rate of fire and stay there. So, can this classic weapon take down Riven? Well, as you can see, absolutely not. We get to around 25% of her health taken off. Now, for a primary weapon, and looking at the damage values here, I don't think that's very bad. We are touching around 800,000 damage, most of us averaging around 600,000 to 700,000. And when we tried it again, we got extremely similar results. But actually, one of us did pass the 800,000 damage dealt threshold. And again, for a primary, that's pretty good, right? I mean, what does it compare with the other exotic auto rifles? Well, let's find out by introducing our next contestant, the Suros Regime. Now, the Suros has got more than a couple of quirks. Its intrinsic exotic perk is Suros Legacy. The bottom half of each magazine deals bonus damage and has a chance to return health on kill. Now, this is backed up by two optional perks. So you have, firstly, Spinning Up. Holding down the trigger increases the rate of fire, very similar to the Sweet Business. The other perk that you can choose is Dual Speed Receiver. While aiming down sights, weapon rate of fire slows while weapon damage increases. So obviously, we had to test this thing a couple of times at least. Firstly, with Spinning Up. And just like the Sweet Business, the introduction of a Lunafaction Well means it's going to constantly reload, it's going to get to that higher than normal rate of fire and stay there. And as you can see, our damage output was pretty comparable to the Sweet Business. Looking at the actual values here, it was either as good, but frankly I would say better, with two of us reaching numbers that were much higher than we were able to reach with the Sweet Business, and the overall damage just being a little bit higher. So I'm actually surprised by that. In terms of DPS on bosses, Spinning Up Suros Regime is better than the Sweet Business. But what if we switched to Dual Speed Receiver? Well, we did, damaged Riven, and as you can see, it didn't do anywhere near as much. Looking at the damage numbers, no one came even close to 800,000. We were doing considerably less than before. So Spinning Up is what you want for DPSing bosses. However, there is one more factor, and that is that this weapon gets bonus damage for the second half of the magazine. That doesn't come up if you're just standing in a well. So, our idea was to have two different wells, one with Lunafaction boots in the front and one without in the back, to shoot your weapon until you get that damage bonus, and then just before it runs out of ammo, quickly walk forward into the front well, get your ammo back, and walk back to constantly be getting that damage bonus. Perhaps that is a way to trick way more damage out of this weapon. Well, we did that, and as you can see, it didn't work. Although it's better than dual speed receivers still, we were doing less damage overall than just standing in the well constantly hitting your shot. It's very difficult to pull off walking forward at the exact right time. The gun starts to shoot so fast that you only get that damage bonus for a fraction of the second, so your timing has to be perfect, and if you fail and have to reload, your DPS tanks. It just wasn't practical, unfortunately. Alright, now moving on to our next contestant, we have the new boy, the Cerberus +1. Its exotic intrinsic perk is Four-Headed Dog, shoots erratic bullets from all gun barrels at the same time. It has another unique perk, which is Spread Shot Package. Aiming this weapon reduces the spread of its projectiles. So this weapon, although it shoots slowly, it's going to be shooting like 4 bullets at once. But is this increase in the amount of lead spewed enough to put this weapon in the lead? Well, let's check it out. Now, the first time we DPS Riven, we did things a little bit differently. We kind of went underneath her mandible. Why? Well, we were concerned about missing because this weapon does have a natural spread to it. It's almost like an auto rifle crossed with a shotgun, and we really didn't want to hit the eyes, especially, you know, if one erratic bullet went up and hit the eye, we could lose the entire damage phase. And we tried that, and it didn't work out that well. Funny enough, I'm saying it didn't work out that well, but the damage numbers are competing, if not passing, with the damage numbers we've seen on the other exotic auto rifles. But we tried a much more traditional approach, just shooting her directly in the mouth, a little bit closer than we were with the other weapons, however, still to reduce that spread. And it turns out the Cerberus +1 is actually pretty darn good at damage output. We were able to get her past much more than 25%, almost approaching a half of her health with just a primary weapon. In fact, we even had someone finally cross the 1,000,000 damage threshold, with a lot of us really not too far behind. The Cerberus +1 has now just cemented itself as the best exotic auto rifle for DPSing ads in terms of pure damage output. And that's honestly kind of surprising. But there is one more contestant, and it's the only energy exotic auto rifle, the Hard Light. So, its exotic intrinsic perk is Volatile Light. Rounds fired from this weapon have no damage falloff, over-penetrate targets, and ricochet off hard surfaces. Projectile damage increases after bounce. Very interesting. It's also got another unique perk allowing it to change elements, but that's obviously totally useless when it comes to a DPS phase like this one. So the first thing we did is just a very traditional damage phase. This is an auto rifle with a 50-round magazine, which is actually pretty impressive. I think people sleep on this gun. Would it be able to just do a decent amount of damage by itself, shooting her in the face? And as you can see, no, not really. In fact, our damage numbers were definitely a lot lower than things like the Sweet Business and the Spinning Up Suros. We're much more close to the dual speed receiver Suros with these numbers. So, unfortunately, Hard Light isn't very good. And guys, that's it. Wait a minute. We've got one more thing to test. Obviously, bouncing the rounds deals bonus damage. So would we be able to be standing in a well and ricochet those rounds off the ground, like be shooting at the ground, ricochet them up into her mouth, and if they're doing double damage, which I believe they do, is that enough to really put this gun in the lead? Well, it turns out that when you stare at the ground and angle it upwards, and by the way, Riven is high enough that you have to like look down pretty far, so you do not see where the bullets are going, unfortunately. When you do that, remember those eyes I talked about that we were concerned with the +1? Well, it turns out that ricocheting off the Hard Light will also result in the eyes being hit. But we tried it a couple more times, and our best result was this one here. We all kind of looked at the circle while standing on this square, and it was a great angle that we all got damage on her. But as you can see, unfortunately, we didn't actually do that much damage. It's just so impractical and so hard to hit Riven in the crit, especially. Like, if you imagine her mouth, and especially from the profile, if you think of the angle of how far upwards the bullet is going, it has a tiny little part of where it's actually hitting her mouth, and then if you angle it just a little bit more, it goes right for her eyes, and you'll lose immediately. So unfortunately, Ricochet killing Riven with the Hard Light turns out not to be practical. Who would have thought? I had no idea. So overall, overall, it was a neat day experimenting with all these exotic auto rifles. And we can say that with confidence, the Cerberus +1 is on the top. It does the most damage output, and that's kind of amazing. But you do need to be within a close enough proximity of the thing you're damaging to hit all of its rounds. Now, in second place, somewhat surprisingly, honestly, is the Suros with spinning up. The increase of rate of fire is going to be even better than the third place option, which was the Sweet Business. Now, after that, we have Suros with dual speed receiver, and then in last place, unfortunately, we have the Hard Light. And so guys, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed, please remember to support it, and if you want to see more videos like this with different gun types, let me know in the comment section down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below. And as always, have a good day.